Far, far away is actually Star Wars, right?
We need Galaxy.
Yeah, Galaxy Far, Far. Anyway, you get the idea. They say this is a true story. They say this happened some centuries after the Buddha lived and taught. Monasteries had proliferated. But then there came a time in which the barbarians, the hordes, were moving across southern Asia and laying waste to the temples, destroying the monastic communities. And there was one warlord that became feared above all else. And the rumor was that he was so terrible that they would leave no monk alive. They would leave no village untouched. The path of fire and violence behind him was unspeakable. It also happens that at this time there was a special little monastery high in a mountain valley where they say one of the greatest living teachers presided as the abbot. And sure enough, news got to that monastery. And the story came, you've got to vacate. This terror is coming. No one can stop him. No one will stand before him, and he will stop at nothing. You will be destroyed. You must live to teach. You are too precious to be lost. Your community, too sacred. Get out while you can. And he smiled, and he listened, and he went on with his affairs. Well, sure enough, more people came, pounding on the gates of the monastery. You've got to get out of here. Don't you know what's happened to my people? Don't you hear what's happened to my village? They are destroying everyone. You must flee for your life. He said, well, appreciate that. We'll have to contemplate this a little bit further. And the monks were getting nervous. How much contemplating do you have to do? It's pretty obvious what's going to happen to us. How far are you going to take this emptiness thing, man? Let's get out of here. But day after day, he simply persisted in his meditations, and his sittings, and his teachings, until all of a sudden, early one morning, a terrible sound approached the gates, like a storm, like a raging beast. Hooves and war cries, and then pounding on the gates. And the monks froze. The villagers in the monastery froze, everyone in terror. And the old abbot, the celebrated sage, walked very calmly and quietly to the gate, where he expected to see nothing short of horror and hell. And he opened it, and he smiled, and he welcomed them in. Well, the warlord who was out in front got down off his horse, furious. He was stained with blood. He was filthy from months of war and carnage. And he drew his jagged, bloody sword and looked at this little monk in the face, and he said, "Don't you know who I am? I could run this sword right through your belly and not blink an eye." And the monk smiled and looked back at him with such love, such peace. And he said, "And don't you know who I am? I could have you run your sword through my belly and not even blink an eye." And they say that with that, the warlord resheathed his sword, and they moved on. Now, whether that is a true story or not, it's a persistent story. It's an important story. And I think it says a lot about this puzzle. Does the spiritual path stand for anything in this world? Or is it only about our relationship to something higher? Something abstract, something greater? Does the spiritual life imply or suggest or demand that we stand for something at some point? Or is it only about self-knowing, self-healing? So let's go through the steps of this question. Well, the first question, of course, is it spiritual to be an activist? Or must those who are spiritual be activists? And our starting point here is always, well, let's not get confused. You're not more or less spiritual, whether you're an activist or not. You're not more or less spiritual, whether you make a difference in the world or not. We are all, if we are one in spirit, if spirit is all, then we are all, and this is good news, folks, get your pens out, we are all already as spiritual as we're ever going to be. Period. I mean, isn't that nice? Are you ready to go? Like, let's just eat and be done with all this. So the first thing we have to set down is this dichotomy that there is a more spiritual way and a less spiritual way. But then the question follows, well, but is there a spiritual journey if everyone is already spiritual? Well, certainly we are all truly one in spirit, but we don't clearly all know that. That is the journey. The journey is remembering. It's awakening, and then it's one more thing. It's integrating. The step beyond. So when we begin the spiritual journey, in a sense, it is more about ourselves, removing the blocks that we have built up against love, as Rumi would say. The spiritual journey is about knowing ourselves, reawakening our sense of energy and soul, and then discovering something deeper inside us that is not us at all. It is the essence of us, but it transcends us, and that is the place where we find spirit at home in our hearts. And whether you call that spirit or consciousness or God or emptiness, whatever you call it, it is the same in all of us, with different names, but remarkably similar descriptions. When we enter that place, we realize our interconnection, our interdependence. The notion that all is one goes from being an idea to an understanding, and then things start to change. We feel the impulse towards compassion because we suddenly know that all our choices change the world. All our words, all our deeds, all our fulfilled and broken promises to ourselves and each other are fashioning this world one moment at a time. What we feed, what we condone, what we allow, and certainly what we do. But certainly what we don't do. But that's not the end of the story, is it? It continues, because with understanding, hopefully for each and all of us, if we don't just hang it up there, we continue to live with that mystery. We continue to cultivate a relationship with the truth of our interconnection, and something else happens. The energy drops. The knowing moves from the head into the heart. And suddenly we are not just aware of our connection with life, with all those that have gone before, all those that will come after, with our source, our origin, and the person sitting beside us. But suddenly we feel love for it all. We see it as family. We see it as self. The earth becomes my body. islands of plastic in the ocean become the cancer in my own veins. The imbalance and the injustice in villages and countries I've never seen before become my own peace of mind. The world ceases to be out there, and we wake up morning after morning, or maybe just once in a while, and we realize it's in here. And when we have that feeling, something is animated. It is our, what some traditions would call karma. It is also our, what some traditions would call dharma. In other words, spirit is now moving. It's animating through the heart, and the soul comes to life. And rather than living from ideas of who we should be and what's right and wrong, rather than living from inherited stories, the universe begins to unfold from within. And it unfolds uniquely in each one of us. Based on the journey of each soul, that to me is the karma. We didn't all come here for the same exact experience. And in that animation of the soul, in the experience of our own unique vitality, the Dharma, our true nature is revealed, and where we can help. Where you, each individual, can and will make a difference. And for some, it will be rescuing pets. And for some, it will be giving to charities that go to war-torn places. And for some, it's volunteering at a school to read. Each person will discover it on their own. But it doesn't have to come as an obligation or a responsibility or a belief. The impulse to end the dis-ease in our world will unfold naturally. But you have to stay on the path. And you have to be fearless at some point in the face of the warlord that will come to your door. And if he hasn't come yet, let me be one of the villagers to let you know he's on the way. Because no life is lived without a measure of sorrow, without a measure of suffering, or without at some point seeing injustice, whether that's just your own behavior at home, or whether it's something that you can't stand by in the world. And that's why so many of our great masters have become examples of spiritual activism. So I invite you now to close your eyes for a moment and just contemplate what this all means to you, what this all means for you. When you are in stillness, when you are in silence, when you are most yourself and not yourself at all, what is that voice you hear crying in the world? What is that commitment you feel left undone? What is that simple daily choice you overlook because it's just uncomfortable or too much effort? And can you envision something different? How might you give? And what might this cause or issue or situation look like in balance, in harmony, wholeness restored?